This is Get Inspired with Dr. Barb. Hello and welcome, our wonderful listeners and viewers, to another episode of Get Inspired with Dr. Barb. We always have incredible guests on my show. Everything we talked about has something to do with education, with improving education. And I speak to those who have something incredible to offer in this area. So our children, teenagers, and not only, and their experiences are just getting better with education. I see improvement of education as improvement of how students feel about education. Does it do anything, and really how they feel about it, because they are participators in this. And today we have another fabulous guest. His name is Todd Cherches. Welcome, Todd, on my show, Get Inspired with Dr. Barb.
Thank you, Barbara. Great having you on the show.
It's wonderful to have you on the show because I feel like your expertise and experience can really speak to so many people, students, teachers, leaders. And by the way, teachers are leaders, actually.
Yes.
Maybe they don't always see themselves as leaders in the current sort of educational climate, but they should see themselves as leaders. So your experience is very applicable. And also any other leaders who are out there, and we have all of them. Don't we see a lot of leaders on LinkedIn? I do see them all the time.
Yeah, I always use the quote by John F. Kennedy where he said, leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. So leaders need to be learners, and learners should learn to be leaders. So there's definitely a link between leadership and learning, and it's a lifelong pursuit, right? It's not like we learn to be a leader and then we're done, right? It needs to be ongoing. And I always say in an ever-changing world, if you're standing still, you're falling behind, right? Because the world is changing fast. So we need to keep up with it through all different means, including podcasts like your own, and reading and TED Talks, and learning in any other way possible.
Hey, I'm trying.
Yes, you're doing a great job. You're contributing a lot to the world of education. So
Thank you. I'm trying, and you also do incredible job. And when someone is passionate about something, like I am passionate about education, that it's also, for some reason, very easy to gravitate towards people who are similar, right? Who think in similar ways, like you. So that's absolutely amazing. And I'm also thinking about children, students in high school, who probably very rarely think of themselves as, I might be a leader sooner than I think, but they don't think that way.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I say, I teach leadership at NYU in Columbia, and one of the things I ask my students at the very first session is I'll say, show of hands, how many of you are leaders? And very few raise their hands. And then I say, tonight we're going to redefine what leadership is, and I'm going to ask you again in 3 hours, and you're all going to be raising your hands. Because I say, even if you're leading your own life and managing your day or your life, you're a leader and a manager, right? So even if you're not leading and managing others, as Peter Drucker said, it starts with leading oneself. If we redefine leadership as small L leadership, is what does that actually mean? Then it helps us to think of ourselves as leaders going forward. It doesn't become this unattainable thing or this thing. I'll be a leader in 20 or 30 years when I get that leadership title. So how are you leading today? How are you leading in the classroom? So that's an important way, the distinction to make if you want to create a next generation of leaders. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. That's how we started basically our conversation. We have more in common than we even know.
Yes.
But I have to say a little bit more about you, because you are CEO and co-founder of Big Blue Gumbo, which is innovative New York City-based leadership development and executive coaching firm. Wow. Also, you are a member of Marshall Goldsmith's MG 100 coaches, and you are ranked by Thinkers 50, Thinkers 360, Global Gurus 30, and the Power List 200 as one of the world's top thinkers, influencers, and authors in the field of management and leadership. Wow. And I'm just going to keep saying wow, right? And you are also a 3-time award-winning adjunct professor of leadership and at NYU, because you are actually connecting from New York City, and as well as lecturer on leadership at Columbia University. And you are a TEDx speaker. And I just listened actually several times to your and viewed your talk. The title is Visual Leadership. No, that's not the title of the talk. The title of the book is Visual Leadership,
Yes.
Leveraging the Power of Visual Thinking in Leadership and in Life. But the talk is on YouTube and we
It's
can,
called The Power of Visual Thinking. Yes.
simple, that's a good thing, right?
Yes.
Power of visual thinking. And we can tell our viewers and wonderful listeners about how to find it. It should be very easy. And then also we're going to attach those links to my show notes. Well, with all these incredible credentials and you are an expert. I just wanted to ask you about several important things regarding visual thinking, because I think that visual thinking is not something that people don't know anything about. I mean, whether we know or not, we using it and students are using it. Teachers are using it. Those who are not connected to education are using it too daily. They just don't know about it that
Yes.
much. They are not aware of it. And the most important part for me is they are not aware of how they can harness like the power of this to be more effective communicators and just get more out of life, right? Because when you are effective communicator, you can have more opportunities and you can utilize them. What do you think about this? Am I right?
Yes, you're definitely right. As humans, we're all wired visually, right? Because sometimes people will say, "Well, what if someone is blind or sight impaired?" We could all still use visual thinking, even if we only see something in our mind's eye. So Shakespeare coined the term "to see something in your mind's eye" in Hamlet when he saw the ghost of his father and didn't know if it was an apparition or a figment of his imagination. He said, "I think I see my father in my mind's eye." So even if we see something in our heads, our challenge is how do we get that idea out of our heads and out there into the world so that other people can see what we're saying, right? So whether you're a little kid, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a grandparent, it doesn't matter. If we're a person, we want to communicate, and if we want to communicate, we need to think about how am I going to get that thought from my head into someone else's head so that they can hear what I'm saying, but also so that they can see what I'm saying. So we are wired visually, just as people. We're wired for storytelling. Again, that's part of what makes us human. So it's just about one, being more aware, and two, being more strategic and more intentional in terms of how we use these different techniques. And in my book, I break it down to four different categories
Yeah.
using visual imagery, mental models and framework, the four in analogy, and storytelling and humor, if and when appropriate. So those are kind of like the four categories, and they could be used by any business professional, any instructor, teacher, professor, anyone. So we could all leverage these skills to be more effective communicators.
That's absolutely amazing. And when you think about the power of visual thinking, is that why I am also interested in this is because, I mean, in today's world, everything is really visual. Social media, and also teachers are more and more aware that students, such as autistic students, often they are really visually uh, sort of focused students. So if you don't make learning more tangible, visual, and experiential, which this
Mm-hmm.
is something you also work with, then we are missing really something. We are doing disservice to these children who are really visual thinkers. And honestly, I think anybody engages more in anything, even in presentation and students who are learning at colleges, if it's not engaging, and that usually means including some form of visual imagery or a movie or video or a storytelling, right, which is very powerful,
Yeah, think about
we are
children's
missing
books.
something.
Think about children's books, right? They're not 300 pages of text, right? They're
Yeah.
they're visuals, the storytelling. The younger the child, the more visuals and the less text there is, and little by little you diminish the visuals and increase the text. Unfortunately, as adults, we tend to shift to too much text and we lose that childlike playfulness, right? One of my goals someday is to create a pop-up book, a leadership pop-up book, right?
That would be
So,
awesome.
because think about that. How fun were those pop-up books when we were kids, right? We open the
Yeah.
page and it's a castle or it's a
Oh my
dragon or
gosh, I'm just
whatever.
going back to my childhood right now
Yeah,
when you talk.
right, right. So it's like again, that's right. We all have that visual in our head, and it's
Yeah.
kinesthetic, right? It's
Yeah.
three-dimensional. So how can we make learning and concepts three-dimensional, right? Get them off the page, get them out of text. There's two scientific principles at play. I won't go into all of them, but all the details. But the picture superiority effect, and if you just Google it, it says that pictures are superior to text when they battle it out, just in terms of our left brain, right brain type of thinking, metaphorically. And this concept called dual AL, dual as in two, dual coding theory says that when you combine text and visual imagery, it's more effective than either on their own, right? That's why
Yeah.
emojis are so effective, right? If you send someone a text with just words, they may or may not read it or remember it. If you send someone just emojis, they may not know what you're talking about. But if you put text and you punctuate it with emojis, it gets people to read it, and people are more likely to understand and remember it. So in my TED Talk, and if you just go to toddcherches.com, you'll find my TED Talk there and information
Yeah.
about the book. I talk about A, C, and R: attention, comprehension, and retention. When you use visual imagery and or visual language, or both in combination, attention, it gets you to focus. Comprehension, it gets you to understand, and
Yeah.
retention helps you to remember. So that is when people say why visuals, that is why in three simple words: attention, comprehension, and retention. So with kids, how do you get their attention? How do you get them to focus? If you show them something as opposed to just telling them, they will focus. They will understand it better, and they're more likely to remember it. So again, this all goes back to the basics of how our brains are wired, how we think, and how we learn.
I would like to ask you now, because this is something that really teachers should utilize more, and some I'm sure do, and
Yeah.
they understand it, and they understand how kids, how teenagers operate these days
Mm.
with visual thinking, digesting in images, videos, all that.
Yeah,
Uh,
maps, charts, graphs, all of those kinds of things, right? We need
is
to
there
do
any
more of that.
one tip or strategy that you think, and of course this is kind of generic because we every teacher is a little different and has a different audience, different students, but is there any kind of strategy or tip you would have for a teacher, let's say at the high school level perhaps, that they can like try something, let's say tomorrow, and to see if that would have, because everything in teaching you have to test, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no guarantee it's going to work.
Right.
But is there any way for them to utilize one of your concepts, something along the line of visual thinking, and they can test it and see if maybe they can get better retention or better attention or better engagement from their students? That would be great if you could share.
Yeah, I mean, just making your slides more visual. You're talking about a place, use a map, right? So it's if you're teaching a mathematical concept, can you explain it with a story? Use of
Mhm.
metaphor, right? Can you use saying this is kind of like that, using a metaphor or analogy. So there's all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
Tangible objects. I keep this, Curious George on my desk to remind me to always be curious, right? Always
Yeah, I
ask
love that.
why. Always dig deeper. I keep Gumby on my desk to remind me always be more flexible, right? Bend over backwards to serve your clients. If you're ignoring an important topic, what's the elephant in the room that we're not talking about, right? So again, people may think, oh, this is stupid or juvenile or immature, but I guarantee you will not forget it. Right? We don't
That's
forget
right.
it because I talk about, if your mind is closed and say this doesn't apply to me, then it's not going to work. But if you open your mind and expand and create all of this
Oh,
space to
ooh.
think in a new, fresh way. So if you close your mind and say, visual thinking, I teach math, this doesn't apply to me, expand your mind and say, all right, how might this apply to me? How can I explain a math problem in a visual way by using a metaphor or a story to help
Yeah.
my concepts, first of all, get students in, get them to understand and get them to remember. Do something different. Make it fun. People work when they're playing, when they're experiencing things. We learn more from doing.
Yeah.
Make it into a gamification of a learning. We could spend time just how do you turn something into a game or a contest or a competition. So you asked for one way, but those are just, those are a few different ways that I incorporate, visuals and imagery and props and demonstrations into what I
Props
do.
are amazing. I just love that. So that's why everybody will have to watch this on YouTube.
Yes,
But
hopefully
I
people
love that.
watch the video version.
I love this spiky kind of bowl. I didn't know exactly where you were going with this, but all of a sudden that thing expanded and it showed how your everything, your vision and everything expands when you open your mind. This
Hmm.
can be very effective with kindergarteners to show that spiky, I call it spiky bowl. I'm sure you had a different one.
It's actually called a Hoberman sphere. So I
Wow.
got it on Amazon. Anyone could buy this
I
and keep it
love
on your
it.
desk. So yes, yes.
I might have to get it, and this will be also effective with college students. I teach those who are going to be teachers, and I
Hmm.
constantly want them to expand their thinking about teaching, experimenting with teaching. So that is going to be very effective. That's what they will remember. They will not remember me saying it, or
Yeah.
maybe some of them will, but this will make them remember. because
Yeah.
it's fun. It's just something's happening. It's different. And
Yeah, I
by
use
the
this with
way,
my coaching
yeah,
clients. I'll say, what are some things that you need work, what's working and what's not, right? So what do you want to continue doing, stop doing, and start doing, right? You
yeah,
can have a whole 1 hour coaching call with someone, or talking about someone's teaching methods. In your last class, Barbara, what you did was real. This is what you did really well. Here are some things that weren't effective that you may want to stop doing, and here are some things that you could start doing. You could use, this something as simple and it's a stress, it's a squishy, like a stress. So I hand these out sometimes to
yeah,
clients, or to say, learning is stressful, but this will help to, relieve some of that stress. So again, it's fun, it's quirky, it's different, and
yeah.
again, I always say you have to do the work. There's no magic wand, right? You actually have to put the work in. You can't just wave a magic wand and make all this happen. You need to say, all right, what can I do differently? And not everything's going to work, right? So you want to try
No.
it, fine tune it. There's a rule of three, right? The first time you do something, you don't know if it's going to work. The second time you revamp it, and the third time you fine tune it, right? And if after the third time it still doesn't work, then maybe you want to go back to the drawing board and say, maybe I need to come up with something different. But again, these are just a few of the methods that I use in my teaching.
It's amazing. But that is also why bringing therapy animal to classroom works,
Mm-hmm.
because it is something different.
Yes.
And they can learn about kindness by learning from my dog, for
Yes.
instance, about kindness. So it's a very similar situation here. You are introducing something different, something that
Mm-hmm.
draws attention. It's fun. It can be even funny. I mean,
Yeah.
what's the problem about being funny? We all want to laugh a little bit
Yeah.
more. It helps
Well,
with learning.
I was once doing a management training workshop on Zoom, and I said, what are the similarities and differences between training a new employee and training a puppy? Right? So they're like, you just happen to have a puppy on you. Yes, yes, I do. She's always next to me. I have
Yeah,
two of
she's
them, as you
ready.
meant, right? But right, isn't that a great metaphor? Think about what are teaching a child versus training a puppy. I'm sure there are a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences, but in the course of thinking in terms of that metaphor, that analogy, it forces you to think creatively, right?
Yeah.
So again, just another example of how we could do it. And again, it makes it fun and it makes it interactive and experiential, and you don't forget it, right? When you do
No,
something like that, you're not going to forget it.
it's absolutely amazing. And it's simple. It doesn't cost that much to get it from Amazon.
Yeah, all of these props I keep on my desk and I use. One of my
Yeah.
clients was talking about when I worked at IBM in 1985. I'm like, you think you're sounding very like wise and you've been around for a long time. Your young employees are just thinking of you as being a dinosaur, right? You're saying that, so they're like, wow, he's that old. So it's like I keep my dinosaur on my desk to remind me to keep my metaphors and stories updated.
Yeah.
Again, you want to speak the language. If I'm talking to someone who's a baby boomer, I'm going to use different analogies and metaphors and examples than someone who's 25 years old, right? So you want to modify or customize
Yeah.
your teaching, your training, your coaching to whoever it is that you're speaking to. Again, so it just reminds us, these props and these physical objects remind us to be innovative, be creative in how we try to get our messages across.
Totally. And they work with such a wide range of ages, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And I
And we
wanted
have
to,
to give a shout out to Perry Knopper. We met through the octopus movement, and they had
yes,
an octopus on my desk, but it's in the other room, so I can't pull out my octopus. Otherwise, I would hold up my octopus because we have our tentacles in a lot of different things because we're nonlinear and neurodivergent thinkers. But we
that's
just have to
right.
give Perry a shout out because we met thanks to
W-
his octopus movement and
Yes,
community.
we have to. And then we also found out that we have more similarities
Yes,
because we ended up studying at the same university, which is really cool.
exactly.
And I wanted to ask you, let's take a teen who's in high school, let's say in 11th grade, and I am a little worried about teens and especially neurodivergent teens. I don't think in high school there is enough focus on listen, guys, you have to learn how to effectively communicate in life. I mean, they have to communicate with the teachers, they have to communicate with their colleagues, with their peers, but also with other people because they are entering a different world slowly, right? An adult
Hmm.
world.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you would have any tip. And of course, we will want them to read your book too. But if you have any tip for them to, so they can think about effective communication, not in a very complex ways,
Hmm.
but maybe they can use some of these aspects of visual thinking
Yeah.
to try it out in the communication, because we also want to send a message. Hey, I mean, you are at the phase of your life when you should try different things, and
Hmm.
also try different things for how to have a little bit more effective communication.
Well, I always say, whoever you're talking to, whether it's one person or 1,000 people, everyone has two thought bubbles over their heads. It's why should I care and what's in it for me, right? Any message, even an email, right? If people don't think, why should I care? Why is this of interest to me? Or how will this benefit for me? Then they're just going to discard it or discount it or not even pay attention to it. So
Mm.
if we could find out from our students, everyone has interests, passions. Is it sports? And if it's sports, is it, do you like baseball? Do you like soccer? Do you like basketball? Do you like football? Find out from a student, what do you like? And then use an analogy or say, all right, you like baseball? This is kind of like in baseball when this happens, right? Or you like music, or you like dance, or you like theater, or you like whatever. Find the metaphor analogy. Like my father, I hated math. I was an English literature major. I loved
Yeah.
poetry. I loved Shakespeare. I hated math. I didn't understand geometry. I didn't understand algebra. My father taught me math by using baseball statistics to teach me how to calculate an earned run average, how to calculate a batting average, right? So he took something we had a mutual joint interest and passion for, which was baseball, and he used that as the topic to teach me how to do math, right? Now, I still didn't do great, but enough that he got my attention. Same thing, you're dealing with a student, find out what are they interested in. Is it cartoons? Is it video games? Find out what it is, and then translate. I sent you an article, we'll put the link. I wrote an article for the New York Times education
Hmm.
section in which I talk about a framework I created called the learning triangle, where you connect the dots between your class content, the external world, and the person, right? So when my students write their learning journals, let's say we're talking about the differences between management and leadership, they had to come up with at least one outside example from the real world or an external resource, that's one corner of the triangle, and or their own lives, a boss they've had, their parent as a leader, whatever it is, past, present, or future. And when they wrote their journal, they had to connect the dots between the class content, the outside world, and themselves personally. One, it keeps students, we haven't talked about AI yet. A lot of students, you're giving them an assignment, they're just putting it into ChatGPT and handing it in. This forces you, by doing this, one, it captures their interest, so they don't want to do that. They want to express themselves. And two, by getting them to connect the dots, that's not something, I guess they could use ChatGPT to fine tune it or refine it or whatever. But hopefully, if you got their interest and sold them on the benefits and gave them a chance to self express, then they're more likely to do it. They're more likely to be engaged. So I think a big part of education is the lack of relevance. Like if a student says, why do I care about, learning about World War II? Well, let's talk about what's going on in the world today and tie it back to all the things happening in the world today that you do care about, and what are the origins going back in history to how we got to where we are today, and use maps and use stories and use historical figures as characters and so if you could, like, that's how I learned to love Shakespeare. I had a teacher, Mr. Patterson. When we did Romeo and Juliet the year before, I had no interest. I didn't know what they were talking about. When we did Julius Caesar that was 10th grade, Mr. Patterson just brought Shakespeare to life. I fell in love, and I went on to read the complete works of Shakespeare by the time I was 18 years old. I literally went through the Riverside Shakespeare. And I read one play after another, all 37 plays. So a teacher can inspire that. I love the quote by William Butler Yeats, who said that education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. Right? So when you have a teacher like Mr. Patterson who lights a fire under you, you don't have to force students to do the work if you've inspired and motivated them. If you're just filling up a pail, then you may or may not get people's attention and get them to do their homework. So again, those are just a few thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, but using analogy and using children's interest to really show them that what they're learning has relevance.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, and it's really true, and I heard it from my own kid, Mom, what are we learning this for? I
Yeah.
really don't see any kind of, I mean, this has nothing to do with my real life I'm going to have.
Yeah, I've
And
never
they,
had a situation in my life where I said, "Oh, I could really use the quadratic equation right now," or sine, cosine, and tangent. I'm
yeah.
glad I learned that because right. I'm sure someone's using it for something. So when I was trying, that's one of the reasons I didn't learn math, because no one ever explain what this was for. What does this mean?
Mhm.
Like I till this day, I still have no idea. I somehow passed. I don't know how. I was, but science was fascinating. History was fascinating. English literature was fascinating.
Yeah.
No one had to force me to read a poem or to read Shakespeare. Well, I had to force myself, and it was torture to learn something like math, right? So again, find people's interests and make it interesting. In fact, one of my secondary roles at NYU, I do faculty development, so I observe new faculty members. And
Yeah.
one professor, he started his lecture by saying, the first hour tonight is going to be really boring, but then it gets interesting, more interesting later on. And my feedback to him was like, no, you can't say. I said, is it boring to you? He said, no, I find it interesting. I said, well, what's interesting about it? And when he explained it to me, he got very animated. I'm like, where was that passion when you were explaining it to the kids? Don't ever start a presentation or a class
Yeah.
by saying this is really boring. If it's boring, then cut it out. Do something else.
Totally. I think that these ideas, unfortunately, are not as often present. I mean, this is a relatively simple idea, but thinking through analogy, teaching children through analogy, many neurodivergent kids, they would really welcome this because they
Yeah.
have they have those interests. But when you think about it, there is so many ways of connecting their interests to all these subjects that they learn. That's what we're doing with the presence of my therapy dog. We connect learning about the dogs to every subject.
Yeah.
And that's just really possible to do if you have this open mind. But I'm also thinking, so that's something for the teachers to consider, but also for the kids, especially probably older ones. I think it is important for these high school teenagers to realize that it's also their responsibility to try to find relevance of what they're learning and these subjects to their interests. They need to start also think in that way. So it's not
Yeah.
just the teacher job to make it all relevant to me.
Well, that's where
But
that
how
learning
do they?
triangle. That's where that learning triangle really kicks in,
Yeah.
where it's like you're giving them the content that corner that's all about you. That's up to them to come up with and say, how do you connect the dots between what's the why should I care, what's in it for me for you, and we need to help them a little bit. But yeah, they have to own. People need to own their own learning. And not just depend, there's teaching and then there's learning. Learners
Yeah.
need to own the learning. There's just so much a teacher can do in terms of piquing that interest. But we could all do a better job of it, and connecting with each student individually is one of the challenges of teaching, but it's important.
Great. I just see so much possibilities here for teachers teaching these children to find this relevance a little bit more on their own.
Yeah.
It can be almost like a project in school. I'm just trying to think of these ideas as
Yeah.
I'm talking to you. I
Yeah.
don't know if anybody has ever done something like that, teaching them that they
Yeah.
have to find relevance, but it would be
Like mo- like
very,
Yeah,
yeah.
like most students, in some way, like music, right? It doesn't matter what it is. So if you say, bring in a song and play it for us on Spotify or whatever, play us a song where the theme of the song connects to what we just read. So that's what my teacher, Mr. Patterson, did. We were doing poetry, and I remember we were doing Robert Frost's poem Fire and Ice, and he said, bring in a song that this poem makes you think of, and I brought in the James Taylor song
Hmm.
Fire and Rain, right? I've seen fire and I've seen rain, and Robert Frost's poem Fire and Ice. They're different, but they're similar. But what's the connection? So that's what we're trying to do is help people connect the dots, right, between themselves, the outside world.
Yeah.
So just in a simple exercise like that, bring in a song that you love. Poetry could sound dead or boring. It's like, the movie Dead Poet Society, right? Why do I care about Shakespeare? Why do I care about Wordsworth? Well, find a singer that you do like, just look at the lyrics and then explain the lyrics to us and act them out. There's all kinds of. I have 3 Ds: define it, describe it, demonstrate it. Right, when you're teaching
Yeah.
something. So the song. Here's the song that you picked. Describe it. Describe it to us. Define it. What does it mean? What's it about? Describe it. Tell us more about it, and then demonstrate how we can use. What did the lyrics of the song teach you about life or leadership or
Yeah.
whatever? Again, you're taking what people know and like and have an interest or passion for, and then connecting the dots between what's happening in the classroom. So again, it
Yeah.
takes a little more effort and work, but it's actually creative and fun, and it gets our students more engaged.
This is a very powerful aspect of visual thinking
Yeah.
because it can really make such a difference in teaching for so many children. It doesn't matter if it's a special need kid, everybody wants to see the relevance of what they're learning to at least their interests,
Yeah.
right? So that would be very, very powerful. Now, I wanted to ask you about, let's take a regular person who is kind of not aware of this power of visual thinking. Would you have any tip for anybody to start kind of using and thinking in a way? Let's say they get up, it can be a part of their morning routine,
Hmm.
how they can incorporate visual thinking to, let's say, boost their mood or just start thinking about new ideas. That would be great if you could have a tip like that.
Yeah, I mean, a fun icebreaker I do is say, look around your room and take any object and fill in the blank. Life is like a blank. Let's say you're having your morning. Well, how is life like a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
That could be, how is life like a stapler, right? So you could take any object, anything in your environment and say, it doesn't have to be life. You could say, how is learning like, or how is coaching like, whatever it is. Let's say you're an accountant, whatever it is that you do, try to come up with an analogy, look around your room and say, all right, how can I connect the dots between what I do, an abstract concept and a concrete object? Sometimes I'll give people, I'll have like a bag of objects and people will take any two objects and
Yeah.
they have to tell us a story that connects these two things. So again, it's just about noticing. It's just about seeing things through a different lens. It's about, how about this? How would, turn on the TV and say, all right, here's a problem I'm facing at work. How would Superman solve this problem? How would how would Homer Simpson solve this problem? How would, pick, how would, pick a famous person and a cartoon, a
Yeah.
fictional character. It doesn't matter. So again, it just forces us to think differently, think outside the box, and that's a cliche. But I always say you can't think outside the box until you have a box with something in it. So having some kind of framework, right? Can you put something into a 4-box matrix? Can you put something? Can you create a diagram or a process? One of the exercises I do with CEOs, I'll do something called silent introductions. You have to introduce. Everyone has a big piece of flip chart paper on the table. You have to introduce yourself to your partner and have a conversation. Where are you from? What do you do? Where did you grow up? But you can't speak. You
Oh,
only have to draw. So they have colored markers and a big piece of paper. So if I was going to ask you, where do you live? I would draw, let's say a house and a question mark. And you might draw a map of New York and point to,
yeah.
or pull it up on your phone, whatever. It forces us to think differently, to be creative, to engage with one another. So those are just a few examples of using stories. Tell us about a
Yeah.
time. Tell us about the worst boss you've ever had. Tell me about the best team you were ever on. So again, it triggers all of these thoughts and memories instead of just, I'm going to teach you the 10 traits of an effective leader. It's like people are asleep by trait number 3. But if you say, tell me about the worst boss you ever had and what made him or her so bad, watch the conversations fly and the energy just, right? And
Yeah.
then you could say, all right, my bad boss did these 10 things. What's the opposite of that, right? And now all of a sudden you have 10 characteristics of a good boss. It's the opposite of what my bad boss did, right?
Yes, I think I might use this strategy of asking, like, draw something as opposed to talk about it, asking my students to introduce themselves to each other. Because usually at the beginning of like a semester of the course, they talk about themselves with each other to learn about themselves. So why not to use drawing? It would be
Yeah.
something totally challenging. Probably nobody ever asked them to draw as opposed to speak or write.
Yeah.
So they're not used to it. Last time they drew, it was probably some time ago.
Yeah, I mean, I have an article. If I wrote it for Inc. magazine, so if you just Google, can you
Yeah.
draw what your company does? I have an article I wrote about this exercise that I do where people have to. So the introductions I just described, but I say the CEOs and business people, how would you draw what you do? How would you draw what business you're in, the
Hmm.
competitors? And in the process of doing that, forces you to, again, use your right brain creative thinking. I'm sorry, I always remember right brain is rhythm, left brain is linear. So that's how I always remember the R and the L. And again, that's metaphorical, not literal. But yeah, when you draw, it accesses another part of your brain that forces you to think differently, to create. And it could be on a piece of paper, but sometimes I'll bring in like, white, those white paper plates that you would use at a picnic. Have people, when was the last time you drew on a paper plate? Right. And then people
Yeah.
could start frisbeeing them around the room. So I actually did an exercise once where I had people, I gave them an assignment. They had to draw on a piece of paper. Oh, I wrote, draw a picture of a leader. What does a leader look like? draw a picture, put your name on the back, draw a picture of a leader on the front, and then they had a frisbee around the room, and everyone had to pick up someone else's plate and then find that person and then ask them about their drawing. So again, people were up out of their seats, they were laughing, they were
Yeah.
kidding around. Because imagine being like in a 3-day leadership retreat. You don't want to be sitting at a desk in a conference room,
No.
but you get people drawing and standing up, and then you tape them all to the wall. And again, it's like, remember we used to draw a picture and your mother would hang it up on the refrigerator with a magnet, right? It's like, it takes us back to that childlike way of looking at the world in a fun and creative way. So why not do that in our teaching and in our training?
That's very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
And would you, I mean, this is something we could talk about for a long time because it's fascinating and I think it can make teaching better, learning better
Yeah.
for anybody, not just students in schools. Is there anything you would like to add as far as your work, your coaching, or your teaching? That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I have tons to add, but the key thing is, when it comes to, I end my TED talk with the quote by Marcel Proust, where he says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. So if everyone leaves this conversation seeing the world through a new lens, looking at what they do in a different
Yeah.
way, saying, all right, how could I do this differently? What's the opposite of what I usually do? Whatever it is, just again, the best way, ask someone else. Say, hey, what would you do? And do you have an example of this? Or I always say there's examples all around us hiding in plain sight. Use the newspaper, use the New York Times or any newspaper and say, what can I, learn from the arts section, the science section,
Yeah.
the main section, entertainment, sports, whatever. There's all kinds of things in our environment we could use to help to bring our teaching to life, and make it real, make it relevant, make it exciting. Because in today's world, there's so many interruptions and distractions and things going on in the world. One of the biggest challenges is just getting people to focus, let alone to
Yes.
learn. So if your brain's all over and you're distracted or you're depressed or anxious, it's very hard to learn. But if you get people engaged in actually doing something, it kind of forces you to get into that state of flow where you're really have people build something together. You could use Legos, you could use Tinker Toys, you can use blocks, right? You can use straws and tape, whatever. Just have people doing something that brings the abstract concepts to life and makes them meaningful.
And that doesn't involve going on the phone, going
Yeah.
on devices. I think this is going to be probably more and more valuable, actually, when we think about it. This type of experiential learning, using objects,
Yeah.
even like a stuffed animal. I mean, these ideas are just amazing. Todd, if you could tell our wonderful audience where they can follow you, where they can find you, you could mention your website, also provide reference to your TED Talk and to the book, that would be great.
Sure. Well, the simplest way, just go to toddcherches.com, and it's CHERCHES, and there you can find my TED Talk and information about my book, or you can find it on Amazon. It just came out in paperback, and it's also an ebook and Kindle, in addition to hardcover. And I don't know if you know this, but it was just translated into Mandarin, and it's coming out in China later on this year. So that's very exciting to me because it's
That is
my
exciting.
first international edition. And also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time, or Facebook, but more on LinkedIn. Just say you saw me on Barbara's show and connect with me. And I have tons of posts and articles and things related to the topic we talked about today, anything related to visual thinking and visual leadership.
Yeah. That's wonderful and a very important topic for if we think about improving education. You cannot do this without taking visual thinking seriously and thinking of ways to implement it for teachers have some thinking to do and some more realization maybe but again, you provided so many ideas about trying these things, making it fun and just trying new things, right? That's what this is about, experimenting. That's what teaching is about. Thank you so much, Todd, for this episode today. It was absolutely wonderful. And thank you, our audience. Make sure to follow us, to follow our show, Get Inspired with Dr. Barb, so you never miss the episode. And see you on social media. And we would like you to tell us what you thought about these ideas. That would be great. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. This is Get Inspired with Dr. Barb.